How do we know when we should turn a bluff catcher into a bluff? Here is one simple trick to figure it out. I feel like I'm a 2016 BuzzFeed article when I say that. All right, anyway, when our opponent can be betting the river thinly for value, say with top pair, top kicker, turning showdown value into a bluff is often the most profitable play. On the other hand, when our opponent is betting the river more polarized, say they are repping a very strong hand or air, probably not the best idea to go for the bluff raise. Let's walk through 4 examples, and hopefully by the end of this video, you have a crystal clear guideline on when and when not to turn your bluff catcher into a bluff like a pro. For context, my name is Marc Goone. I played poker full-time for over 5 years. I started at $1, $2, worked my way up, played as big as 200, 400, and netted over 7 figures along the way. All right, without further ado, let's start with when we should not turn our bluff catcher into a bluff. Let's jump right in. All right, so first example here, we are playing 2-5, 2K effective, so relatively deep. The villain, a recreational player here, is going to open up the cutoff to 25. And in this situation, I generally like to play 3-bet or fold. I like to play pots heads up in position against recreational players. I'm not really a big fan of letting the blinds in and going multi-way. In that case, you're gonna have to play more of a game of bingo where you hit your hand. And recreational players, when you 3-bet them in general, are not going to fight back. They're not going to 4-bet enough. They're just going to call too much. So let's go ahead and 3-bet. This may look a little bit light on the surface, but let's just isolate, play a pot heads up in position. So we are going to 3-bet. The villain is going to call. We are going to go to a flop 6-6-9. The villain is going to check it over. And my MO in 3-bet pots is just going to be to range bet. In single raise pots, I usually go around half pot because that's the size where they raise off their strong shit and call with their weak shit. In 3-bet pots, because the absolute size of the pot is bigger, generally like to go a little bit smaller, somewhere between 30 to 40% pot here. So I'm going to go $60. The villain is going to call. We're going to a turn, which is a 10, bringing in the backdoor clubs and also bringing in the straight here. Villain's going to check it over. And at this point, I just think we have showdown value here. We beat all of the ace highs that floated the flop when we see bet small. So I am just going to check this back. I don't really see any reason to continue barreling here. And in general, this is maybe one of the most profitable lines in all of live poker. If you are not utilizing this line, please start utilizing it if you'd like to win more money. C-bet the flop, check back the turn with showdown value, bluff catch the river. Why is this so profitable? Well, they call too much on the flop and raise off too many of their strong hands, so they just get to the river with way too weak of a range. And what do they do when they get to the river with no showdown value after the turn goes check, check? Well, they just come out and bet. And the really cool thing is, like you're going to see here, when they come out and bet on the river as a bluff, they usually choose this 40% to 60% size. And then whenever they have a very strong hand, they just generally go bigger. So this is why this is one of the most profitable lines in all of poker. Not to get too sidetracked, but now villain comes out and bets 125 into 287 here. My first thoughts on this river were, I'm probably not going to fold here because I think villain could be over bluffing. We see bet the flop small, check back the turn. You're just gonna have a lot of ace highs that floated the flop. So I think a call is profitable, but could a bluff raise be more profitable here? And as I started to think about that, the answer is no. Even though they're choosing a small size on this river, I don't think villains come out and bet a hand like king jack or king queen, because when you 3-bet, you c-bet the flop and check back the turn. What hand do they put you on all the time? Ace king. So going to this river, they're just gonna expect you to have ace king quite a bit. So if they have a hand like ace 10 or king queen, they're not going to come out and bet this river. What they're saying when they come out and bet this river is either I can beat ace king or I can't. By raising here, we're not really accomplishing a whole hell of a lot. This is either going to be a bluff, which I would expect it to be with this sizing. It could be some 6x, it could be some straights, or it could be some full houses. Now, I'm gonna expect it to be weighted way, way, way more towards bluffs than I would expect it to be weighted towards full houses or trips here. So because they are repping a more polarized range here, I do not think bluff raising is very good. I actually did call in this spot and villain showed ace jack of hearts, and we take this one down. One more example of when not to turn our bluff catcher into a bluff. All right, so we are going to open ace 5 of diamonds in the cutoff. Villain is going to call on the button. Again, 2000 effective, so we're relatively deep in a 2-5 game. We flop a big combo draw, and as is my MO when out of position in single raise pots, I am generally checking range because the mistakes live villains make when you check to them is they just overstab on the flop, they telegraph their hand strength with their sizing, and they do not protect their check back range when they check back. So we are going to check it over, and villain is going to c-bet 30 into 47. We've got a big combo draw. We are super, super deep, and I just think we can apply a ton of pressure here, even to hands like top pair. I think we can get to fold by the river quite a bit of the time. And even if we can't, we just have so much equity in our hand. And if you factor in that we do have some fold equity here, if they fold king queen or queen jack 20-25% of the time by the river, well, we just get to win this hand a lot of the time. So applying the pressure, very, very good when we have the equity to back it up. So we are going to put in the big boy monster check raise here. The reason why I like to go with these big check raise sizes, villains are just going to stab with a bunch of bullshit here, right? If they have pocket fives, if they have pocket sixes, if they have ace jack of hearts or whatever, they're folding no matter what size we check raise to. But if they do have a hand like queen X or a king high flush draw, those hands aren't folding to one single check raise no matter what. And whether we have a bluff here, like with ace five of diamonds, or whether we have a value hand here, like with pocket fours, we want them to pile in more money right now on the flop and pile in more money on the turn, whether we have a value hand or we're bluffing. And then we can split and diverge on the river and get them to try to call when we have a value hand and get them to try to fold when we have a bluff. So that's the goal here. We go to 240. The villain is going to call. And now, interestingly, the turn is an ace. So now we bink top pair. Our hand goes from a combo draw to kind of a thin value, maybe showdown value type hand here on the turn. And we're just way ahead now of hands like king queen or queen jack. And I don't think we're going to be able to get two more streets from hands like that. So at this point, I think maybe checking with our hand is best. So we are going to check, and now the opponent is going to go 240, just under half pot here. And obviously we have a pretty easy call. Going to a river, which is an offsuit king, we are going to check it over again. And now the villain goes $400. So at this point, I like to pull out the handy dandy bluff catching checklist. Do we beat value? No, we don't beat any value. There's a very, very low chance that villain has a hand like ace jack or something like that. Remember, we check raise the flop to 8x. So this is going to be 2 pair plus or nothing here. Are they capable? I'd say in live poker, when we have shown so much aggression, when we raise pre-flop, when we check raise the flop, we call the turn, and now the board is a triple Broadway board where ace king is out there, looks pretty good for us. I'd say most villains are probably not capable of bluffing this spot. Did we give them rope? Well, we gave them a little bit of rope by checking the turn, but remember, we were the pre-flop raiser. We check raised the flop huge. Is the size significant? $400, getting pretty significant in a 2-5 game. Yes, the size is significant. And do they have non-showdown value? Really, the only non-showdown value hands they would have here would be smaller diamond draws, like jack 9 of diamonds, 7, 8 of diamonds. So not a ton of bluffs here. And then the question is bluff raising profitable? Should we turn our bluff catcher into a bluff? And this is one of those examples where I think no, because their range here in this spot is very, very polarized, right? They either have 2 pair, like a hand like ace queen, a set, like a hand like fours or deuces, or they have absolutely nothing. They just have like 7, 8 of diamonds or something like that in this spot, right? This would be a situation which would be villain dependent for me if I would want to call or if I would want to fold, but I do not think I would be bluff raising in this spot ever, because it just doesn't really accomplish much. If we raise here, well, we're just folding out all of the hands that we beat anyway, like 7 high or jack high or whatever, and we're just getting snapped off by 2 pair or sets. Probably against most live villains, I think you could comfortably fold this spot because I think it is under bluffed. And if someone is under bluffing, if the pool is under bluffing, taking every bluff catcher and turning it into a fold is more profitable than calling. I would lean fold here, but this would definitely not be a spot where I would want to turn my bluff catcher into a bluff. All right, guys, real quick, if you're enjoying the video, please hit that subscribe button. It lets the algorithm know that this type of video is what you guys enjoy, and I will make more videos just like this. Thank you, guys. Have a gentle day. All right, next, I'm going to walk you through 2 examples where turning our bluff catcher into a bluff could be very profitable. All right, first example here, 2-5 again, 2K effective. We open up queen 10 offsuit in the cutoff. Villain is going to call on the button. We go to a flop, queen 7-6. I'm just checking range out of position in a single raise pot. We check. They go with half pot. I think this hand is probably too thin to raise, way too good to fold, obviously. So just seems like a pretty standard call here. Now the turn is a 5 of clubs. Don't particularly love this card. Obviously brings in the 8-9, which is the obvious draw here on the rainbow no flop. So we are going to check it over. Now villain goes 60. We are not folding top pair to this size to a double barrel when we've given them rope. So again, we are going to call, but not particularly loving it. Now the river is the deuce of clubs. And at this point, we're just kind of hoping the river goes check, check, and our opponent has a hand like 7, 8, or pocket 9s. Now we check it over and our opponent goes $80. So what am I thinking in this spot? The small size from our opponents from out of position on rivers is usually heavily weighted towards bluffs because villains like to get a cheap price on their bluff and they don't like to get embarrassed. And if the river goes check, check from out of position, they have to flip over and show jack high or whatever that didn't bluff. But when they're in position, I find they just often check back more of their bluffs because the out of position player has to show. They can just go, oh, I missed, I didn't get there, whatever. They don't have to show their cards. So what I find is this small size on the river from live poker players in general is usually just going to be thin value hands that are just pretty scared of maybe getting raised. This is going to be a pretty thin value range, right? This is going to be hands like ace queen, king queen, hands like that. The two factors that generally drive sizing in live poker are fear and greed. So fear would be in the spot if our opponent has a hand like ace queen. They're a little bit scared of 8-9, of queen x of clubs, of 7x of clubs, whatever. So they go a little bit smaller because of fear. Greed would be in the spot our opponent does have a hand like 8-9 or pocket 7s. If they have those hands, they get greedy and they just choose the bigger size. So I find when they use this size on the river in position, it's generally going to be hands that are betting relatively thin. When our opponent is repping a more thin linear range, when they could be betting top pair, top kicker, that's a pretty good time to turn our bluff catcher into a bluff. When opponents triple barrel, they are under bluffing, right? Everything gets there. There was a rainbow board on the flop. The straight draws get there. The backdoor flush draw gets there. And we have a bluff catcher. Our opponent's under bluffing. So I think folding is going to be fine here. I think the other option is turning our bluff catcher into a bluff. So in this spot, I actually think that's the most profitable option because I think opponents here will find folds with hands as strong as ace queen, king queen, queen jack on this river almost all the time. If you lay down the hammer and choose the big boy size, and you're just not going to run into a brick wall all that often because when opponents do have a flush, a straight, or a set on this river, they will generally just go bigger. So I'm going to turn this one into a bluff here. Going to put in the big boy raise size 565. We are going to get the fold, get it through, and take down a nice little pot. All right, next hand, 2-5, 2K effective again. Opponent's going to open the cutoff to 20. We've got the second best hand in poker, pocket aces. We're going to 3-bet on the button to $70 hairs. The opponent is going to call 8-4 deuce. They check it over. We are going to c-bet our entire range, 30 to 40% pot here in position in a 3-bet pot. We go $50, and now our opponent is going to check raise. And at this point, I like to consider all the options. Folding's off the table, right? Got pocket aces with the backdoor nut flush draw, right? Folding's off the table just because we can still be beating a lot of our opponent's value. We could be beating hands like pocket 10s here, pocket jacks, pocket queens that may check raise this flop at some frequency. Not to mention our opponent could still have quite a few bluffs here that we are ahead of. Hands like 7-6 of hearts or king x of hearts, or maybe they're just spaz raising because we bet small, whatever. Pocket aces, strong enough to call here. Bet 3-betting here from us. Always like to consider it, but I don't love bet 3-betting here because I think a hand like pocket 10s or pocket jacks may get squeamish and start folding here. Sometimes if we go for the bet 3-bet. Also, if they are just spazzing, we want to continue to let them spaz. So let's just call with pocket aces. We've got a pretty good hand. We're in position. We can see what they do on the turn. We go to a turn, which is a 3. Now opponent goes 250 into 447. Don't love raising, don't love folding. Calling seems pretty good. We can still be beating some of their value. And of course, we are still ahead of the bluffs. So we are going to call. And now the river is the 10 of hearts. We are kind of praying for the villain to check this one over. And then at that point, we can evaluate, probably just check it back. But villain is going to go 300. So let's think about a couple things on this river. One, do you think opponents in general check raise flush draws too much or too little? Opponents in live poker generally err on the passive side and they just don't check raise their draws enough. So they're just not going to have a ton of flush draws. If our opponent did check raise this flop with 8x of hearts or king x of hearts, queen x of hearts, whatever, and they get there on the river, is the type of opponent who's going to be super aggressive with a flush draw in a 3-bet pot. Bink the river. Are they now going to bet 1/3 pot? I don't think so. So this is not going to be a flush on the river at a very high frequency at all. Would our opponent still be betting a hand like queens or jacks here? No. right? If they get here with jacks or queens, they're gonna check. Could they have a hand like pocket 8s or pocket 10s that may still be betting thinly on this river when they have a set? Sure. So now going through what our opponent has, we've deduced they probably don't have a flush. They probably don't have an overpair. They could have a set, or they could have some type of airball bluff. Is the airball bluff likely? Probably not. Everything get like a hand like 5-6, that hand gets there. It would have to be something like 6-7 of clubs or something like that. Just seems very, very unlikely. Even, I mean, hands like 5-6 and ace-5 get there on the turn. So probably a spot that's going to be under bluffed, but also they're just not going to have a lot of flushes in the spot. And also if you look at our hand, not that I think it matters all that much, but having the ace of hearts is nice. It's a nice little backup. But again, we just don't think they're going to have many flushes at all when they check raise the flop, barrel the turn, and then choose a size on the river. So our opponent's range in this spot is probably going to be sets and air, and it's going to mostly be weighted towards sets. So when we look at our hand, pocket aces, we have a pure bluff catcher here. Is our opponent over bluffing or under bluffing? Well, they're probably under bluffing, so our hand is not a profitable bluff catch. Can we turn our bluff catcher into a bluff? And this is one of those spots I think it could be good. Why? Because our opponent is representing a range that is betting more thinly. But wait, Mark, they're not repping over pairs, they're repping sets. Yes, exactly. But on this board, sets are not anywhere close to the nuts. So in this spot, I think a lot of opponents would strongly consider folding hands like pocket 8s, pocket 4s, pocket 10s, if we put all the money in. So here's how I like to keep myself logically consistent in this spot. If our opponent flipped over a hand like pocket 4s here, and we had pocket 8s, would we go all in for value? Do we think our opponent would call with pocket 4s if we jammed on this river with pocket 8s? Most players would probably fold, but you may be saying, in my pool, they're always calling with pocket 4s. Okay, great. So you should be going all in when you have pocket 8s, when you have pocket 10s, when you have any flush in the spot. However, if players in the spot are folding sets, I think it's going to be very profitable to turn any hand that doesn't beat a set here on the river into a bluff, to turn any bluff catcher into a bluff. Now, to be clear, really nice having that ace of hearts, but I don't think it matters all that much. I just don't think it matters. People get too caught up in blockers when blockers just aren't that relevant. Why are they not that relevant? Because our opponent is going to be under check raising with a flush draw on the flop, and if they do have the ace X of hearts, if they do have the nuts on this river, they would not be choosing the size. So just like having the ace of hearts, just not all that relevant. I do think turning any hand that can't beat a set here on this river into a bluff is going to be pretty good if we think our opponent is capable of folding sets. From what I've seen, I think a lot of opponents at this stack depth in 2-5 will fold sets. So I would take pocket aces here. I would turn our bluff catcher into a bluff. I would go all in this spot. I want to leave you guys with one little trick. When our opponent is repping a thin value range on the river, when they could be betting top pair, top kicker for value, right? When they're repping thinly. Well, in that case, our bluffs want to go huge and our value wants to go small. Why? Because they're going to fold top pair, top kicker quite a bit if we put the big boy raise size in. So therefore our bluffs want to go very big. And conversely, our value wants to go very small because we want them to call. We want them to call with top pair, top kicker or a weaker hand. Now, when our opponents are betting more polar, meaning they're repping more of the nuts or nothing, that's a situation where I don't like to make a lot of bluff raises, as I talked about. But if we are going to make bluff raises when our opponent is polar, our bluffs should be very small and our value should be the biggest size possible, right? Because when our opponents are repping polar, they either have the nuts or air. So when we're raising with a bluff, we can literally just click it 2x and get them to fold all of their air, maybe their air that we lose to, right? And we lose the minimum when we run into the nuts. And then when we have the nuts against a more polar range, we just want to pile in all the money. Because if they're repping, say, the second or third nuts or the fourth nuts or whatever, and we have the nuts, they're probably not folding that hand. So again, when our opponent is repping a thin range, our bluffs go large, our value goes small. When our opponent is repping a polar range, our bluffs go small, our value goes big. All right, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video on when to turn your bluff catcher into a bluff. Hopefully it turns you into the biggest boy possible and catapults your fat ass to the moon. Thank you guys and have a gentle day.